It's an honour to be standing in front of you. I often run workshops at the Literacy and Numeracy Symposium, and people come there by choice. Often leave early. Last year we were here again, and I talked about, in a workshop that I ran, I talked about transition. And I think that is a very, very important topic, and it's a theme I'd like to pick up on again this year in this session. The problem with workshops is that they give you 40 minutes, and by the time you've done activities and left time for questions, you're left with about 20 minutes, frankly. So, as I was saying, transition is an issue that I think is dear to my heart in terms of the work that I do with our tutors at Unitec in Auckland. And all you Hurricane supporters, don't complain about the final. You got into it. I'm a Blues supporter. Ostensibly, they train at Unitec. I put it in inverted commas. The thing with working with tutors, and I think our students are in the same position, is that they're facing the challenges of transition. And what I want to talk about today is to start exploring a framework which unfortunately isn't original, Diana, but it's one that I came across and which has been very, very helpful for me in finding ways to understand where people that I work with are coming from. And the place I want to start is with this picture. I was looking around for a picture that might express the theme of the conference, which is flying higher, and I thought of Bruegel's Icarus picture, but we all know what happened to Icarus. So I flagged that and went for this one, which you may recognize. So a bit of art history and a bit of history, if I can put this painting in context. It was produced about 1830 by a Japanese artist. It's called A View of Mount Fuji Under the Great Wave off Kanagawa, often referred to as the Great Wave. In the 1830s, Japan had controlled its dealings with the West for about 200 years. It had kicked out foreigners in about the 1630s, and here in 1830 it was coming to the end of this period, not of isolation, but of controlling how it was going to deal with foreign elements. And 20 years after this painting was done, Admiral Perry wandered into various harbours in Japan with a very nice letter from the United States President saying, we've sent you 4 very small warships, there are bigger ones lurking over the horizons, we would very much like you to engage with us in the West. Gunship diplomacy. One reading of this painting is to look at this framework which I'm going to describe. There in the distance you have Mount Fuji, a symbol of security. But if you look at the Great Wave, you'll see at its base there are 3 ships filled with terrified fishermen. I assume they're terrified. So those brown things that you can see there. They're a long way from safety, they're a long way from Mount Fuji, and this looks as though this great wave is about to break over them. And one reading of this painting is that this period of isolation, this period of security for Japan where it controlled its destiny and the foreign engagement with the powers, the industrial powers and the colonial powers was coming to an end. And the Great Wave is a wave of change that the country is facing and would face over the next century as the colonial powers and the industrial powers moved in to take advantage of the population and export and import and business interests. So I want to explore this painting in terms of two things. The first is what I'm going to call a state of secure orientation. The second, symbolized by the Great Wave, is a state of disturbed disorientation. And the work that we do with our tutors in terms of literacy and numeracy is moving them, or they're feeling that they're moving from a state of secure orientation to disturbed disorientation. I wasn't able to download it because the NRDC website in the UK is actually down at the moment having repairs, but there's that report, and if I can quote it, it says something like, "You wouldn't expect a maths teacher to teach plastering, would you?" A few nods around the audience. You're familiar with that report. But to me, that expresses the state of disturbed disorientation. I was secure. I was a plumber or a mechanic or, I don't know, a nurse or whatever, and I was secure in that I thought I knew what I was doing here and what my job entailed. I knew my content, I knew my discipline, I had some idea about how I was going to teach that, whether that was well formed or not, it's a case in point. But suddenly you're asking me to do this other stuff, and we move our tutors into this place of disturbed disorientation. We're asking them to embed literacy and numeracy. And so how do they respond? And it's not just the transition for our tutors, it's also the transition for our students, where they come into a tertiary environment, and here I'm addressing our situation, especially at Unitec in the ITP sector. You'll have to go and ask Susan about transferring this knowledge into your particular areas of expertise and work. But our students have this same experience, whether they're school leavers or whether they are mature students coming back or whether they're international students coming into New Zealand's education system for the first time. They thought they knew what being a good learner was, and suddenly we're asking them to do a whole lot of things which they aren't familiar with. And it may be that we're asking them to deal with knowledge in different ways, or we're asking them to deal with technology in different ways, or we're asking them to do a whole lot of stuff that they're not familiar with. And what is that process of transition? Because suddenly they find themselves in that disturbed disorientation. And looking through the program, I thought, well, there's actually some of the sessions that have been listed in the program are actually dealing with this sort of stuff. So those are just three. I checked with Charles earlier about writing, a manly pursuit. Here we have students, male students obviously, coming in and not expecting to be asked to write because, well, you know, writing, we don't do writing, and trying to persuade them in that space of disturbed disorientation that writing may actually be good for them. That final one, you can read it. But similar language actually from our tutors as well. What the hell are you asking us to do here? You know, numeracy is not too bad because we see maths as part of the content in carpentry or automotive engineering or whatever it is. But reading, you're really asking us to do reading? It's that state of disturbed disorientation. So, 3 questions. What are the great waves for us as educators? What are the great waves for our colleagues? And what are the great waves for our students? What are these things that are coming down on us which are almost looking as though they're going to swamp Mount Fuji, that place of secure orientation? We thought we knew how the world operated, but suddenly we find that it's not operating in this way, and we need some help and guidance to actually work through this place of liminality. The second question about education in general, what are the things that are contributing to disturbing disorientation in education? MOOCs are one, I guess. Technology is one. There's a joke around Unitec that MOOCs are now going to be called MOOs. They're dropping the C off the end because no one ever finishes them. The third question is probably the most significant. In some ways, it's good to be in that state of disturbed disorientation. It's not a bad place to be. It's a place of challenge and provocation and demand, but you don't want to spend your whole life there. So how do we move from one state and into the next one? And the next state I'm going to call surprising reorientation. And picking up again on the theme of Japan, I looked around for a symbol for this, and this was the best thing I could come up with. That reluctant as it was to enter the global world and the global economy that Britain and America in particular were espousing and trying to encourage them to do so, that after a long time, Japan seized that particular bull by the horns, and we know the result in terms of their engagement with the rest of the world, a surprising reorientation. So those three states, a secure orientation, a disturbing disorientation, then a move to a surprising reorientation. And for me, thinking about our students and the staff that we deal with, this framework has proved to be really, really helpful in my empathy and sympathy for them, in that we are asking them to do things and change their beliefs about teaching, their beliefs about learning, their beliefs about themselves, their beliefs about the way education operates. And we've heard several times over the course of this day, and no doubt over tomorrow as well, that targeting and hitting people at those core beliefs and values is very, very, very challenging. So how do we move? How do we go from that disturbing disorientation to leave that behind and into this place of surprising reorientation? I'm not really sure, but one answer that I've come up with is these two words: structure and texture. The structure one was really, really easy to come up with. The texture one I really struggled with. And then I found that someone actually, speaking tomorrow, I think it is, has actually got that in their abstract, and I was suitably encouraged by that, because I thought, oh, well, maybe there's two of us in the world that's thinking about these things. By structure, I mean all the good things that TEC have put into place. The assessment tool, Pathways Awarua, in Kalni, the assessment tool, what else? The whole bunch of stuff at the National Centre. You've got to have structure. You've got to have these things. It's really, really important that you have these things. But if you only have those things, it's not going far enough. You also need texture. And I'm going to try and explain what I mean by texture. I'll actually just skip through that slide. There is a structure. The progressions, another structure. There's a structure that we're really familiar with, or I hope we are. The literacy dynamic. It's on the front page of your website. It's all over the show. Know the learner, know the demands, know what to do. The problem, if we limit ourselves to structure without texture, is that we end up with, I think, a convergent approach to things. So it's very tempting, and I've seen this happen too many times not to be concerned about it, is that if we have the structure of the assessment tool, knowing the learner can be reduced down to 465 plus or minus 32, plus a couple of white dots on a graph and a few intent statements that we really try hard to understand but don't really. And if we reduce knowing the learner to that, then we're going to miss out on a whole lot of things. So what I want to propose is that we actually start to change our way of thinking about this literacy dynamic. And I'm encouraged to see, I think, that there's a number of sessions that are going to do exactly the same thing. So I'd like to take out Know the Learner and put that in. Observing some of the titles and abstracts through the symposium, there's enough there to say we need to recognize where the learner is coming from. We need to recognize the cultural things that they bring into the classroom. We need to recognize their Māoriness or their Pacifica-ness or their youthfulness or whatever. And it's encouraging because TEC have acknowledged this in that they have got the assessment tool, but they're adding texture to that with the Māori part, the youth part, and so on. That there is an acknowledgement that we can't reduce our learners simply down into a convergent number, but we need to acknowledge that there's a whole lot of things that they bring, a whole lot of challenges that they bring, but a whole lot of richness and a wealth of approaches and knowledge that they also bring into the classroom. So recognizing the learner. Knowing the demands again, changing that to recognizing the literacies. For too long, and I'm quite a slow learner, I saw the progressions as a cognitive exercise. And if you run your eye along the top for reading, for example, decoding, vocab knowledge, text features, comprehension, critical reading, for me, they were all things that happened up here. It's sort of a cognitive thing. If we can get our students and teach our students to actually engage cognitively in these things, then we're set. We'll have sussed reading. Those things are important, really, really important. They're essential, but I also want to acknowledge that we need to recognize that literacies are social events, that there are things surrounding literacies, as Susan has pointed out, in terms of health literacies, or automotive literacies, or plumbing and gas fitting literacies, that there are things that happen in the social environment that aren't purely cognitive. They're experiential and they're emotional and there are a whole lot of other things. And we need to be cognizant of those and aware of those and recognize literacies, not simply the demands of our courses. I've got a 22-year-old son who's in his final year at university. He's at work at the moment and works part-time and in the holidays for a plumbing company. He's just finished the prison out in South Auckland, so they do large commercial stuff, not residential, and he's working at a shopping centre at Westgate. If you know Auckland at all, Westgate is the thing at the end of the motorway, huge, big development. I asked Jeremy if there was anything different about this particular shopping centre, and he said, no, once you've seen one shopping centre, you've seen them all. He didn't actually say that. That's a dad joke, hey? Yeah. Anyway, I thought I'd slide it in there because Susan had so many laughs, hey? I thought it was about time. Anyway. And then not simply knowing what to do, but recognising what needs doing, especially in relation to these redefinitions of the other two aspects of the literacy dynamic. So I'm asking for, I guess, what I'm calling texture. That the structure needs to be there, but there needs to be a subtlety and a responsiveness and a texture about all of this, which is hard to define and capture, but the tutors who are part of that discipline and part of that literacy community and part of that community of practice know what that texture looks like. And as an outsider, I can't teach them that. All I can ask is that they be aware of that and start to articulate that. Jeremy, working on the plumbing sites, the commercial sites, poor little white boy, really. You know, he comes from a family which is third generation university educated. He comes from a family that's got rooms full of books. He discusses social imaginaries and sociology at the dinner table, and then suddenly this immersion into a culture which was totally foreign to him was just gobsmacking. You know, it was a real culture shock to him. And all credit to him, he survived it and is still surviving it, but boy, did he learn a lot in going and working in that particular environment, and it's stuff that I couldn't teach him. But what I learned from that is this whole thing about the literacies and their social nature, and that communities have their particular ways of working and speaking and expressing ideas and debating and constructing knowledge. And it's about, you know, vocabulary and what does liquefaction mean. I obviously haven't, I'm up to 39 exposures to that. I just need one more to actually get it right. So coming back to the symposium, I think that I've tried to identify some of the sessions, and if I'm doing your session a disservice, I really do apologise. There is the Fair Trading Act, but if I'm doing it some value and you don't have enough handouts for your session, you can just come and pay me a commission. So looking at some of the titles, The boxes are ticked, that's structure. What else do the results tell us? What's the texture that's going on behind the assessment tool? Know the learner, that's part of the dynamic, but know the learner in terms of culture, language, values, and beliefs. Pathways awarua, structure, but many directions, texture. Numeracy education, and that's your one, isn't it? Yeah? Go to it, it'll be great. But involved in that are that idea of dreams, passions, and potential. Again, I think this contrast between structure and texture. Embedding language and literacy, but in a police context. So there's that texture as well. Adding more feathers to the wings, I think, is all about adding texture. So I want to leave with one final image, and I really racked my brains about this because I wanted an image that said, remember the framework. Remember the framework. You've got secure orientation, you've got disturbed disorientation, and you've got surprising reorientation. Remember the great wave of Kanagawa. So how can I mash something together that captures the literacy and numeracy element? And I thought one way of doing that is going to the literacy and numeracy experts who put Sesame Street together. Because if there is any program that's a good literacy, numeracy, educational thing, it's Sesame Street. And so please, I'd like 3 minutes of silence while you contemplate this image and sear it onto your brain. The framework that I've found so helpful, education and literacy and numeracy. Thanks very much.